In the year 536 AD, something happened during the darkest year in world history. The sun disappeared for 18 months, crops rotted, famine engulfed the entire world, and the Scandinavian people believed Ragnarök has come, Chinese records say. The dragon devoured the sun. Maya texts write, the gods became angry. But modern science reveals a very different truth. This was a volcanic eruption. And the catastrophe created by that eruption was the real foundation of Ragnarök, the most famous legend in Viking mythology. The story I'm about to tell you will show how a single volcanic catastrophe shaped an entire civilization's belief in the end of the world. Here's the scientific truth behind Ragnarök. Our story begins in 536 AD. This year was a turning point not only for Scandinavian history, but for all of world history. That year, records from all over the world told the same story. The sun disappeared. Byzantine historian Procopius wrote, "Throughout this year, the sun gave no light as if eclipsed. Its rays were only as bright as moonlight, even at noon." Chinese records were even more dramatic. The dragon devoured the sun. The sky turned blood red. People could not see their own shadows. Records from Irish monks. The sun lost its brightness. Crops rotted, famine began. But the most detailed records came from the Scandinavian region. Because this catastrophe was felt most severely there. In the Icelandic Viking chronicle called Landnámabók, it was written, that year winter never ended. The sun became invisible, the earth froze, the seas were covered with ice. Modern science now knows what this lost sun event was. Analysis of ice cores conducted in 2019 showed that in 536 AD, massive amounts of volcanic ash and sulfur dioxide were scattered into the atmosphere. According to Dr. Michael McCormick from NASA, 536 AD was the worst year in Europe in the last 2,000 years. Not just Scandinavia, but the entire northern hemisphere was affected. The effects of this volcanic winter lasted for years. Tree rings show that between 536 to 550 AD, global temperature was 1.5 to 2.5 degrees lower than normal. And during this exact period, Ragnarök beliefs began to strengthen among Scandinavian peoples. According to Viking mythology, Ragnarök begins with Fimbul winter. This meant an endless winter lasting 3 years. In the ancient Icelandic poem called Völuspá, it says, "Fimbul winter will come, brother will kill brother, snow will last 3 years, the sun will disappear, stars will fall from the sky, the world will shake." When modern science looks at this description almost perfectly describes the 536 AD catastrophe. Samples taken from Greenland and Antarctic ice cores show that a long volcanic winter really did occur between 536 to 550 AD. Dr. Dallas Abbott from Columbia University explains, the volcanic eruption in 536 AD scattered 100 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. This blocked sunlight and dramatically dropped global temperature. This effect was felt much more severely in the Scandinavian region, because sunlight was already scarce at northern latitudes. In archaeological excavations in Denmark, starvation traces were found in 6th century settlements. Human skeletons showed signs of nutritional deficiency. In excavations on Sweden's Helge Island, half-finished food remains were found in houses from this period. It was as if people had suddenly fled. And most interestingly, these archaeological findings exactly match the period that Viking sagas called the Great Famine. This couldn't just be coincidence. What caused the global catastrophe of 536 AD? Modern volcanologists are working on 2 main theories. First theory, the Krakatoa eruption. According to Dr. Richard Stothers' research, the Krakatoa volcano in Indonesia experienced a massive eruption in 535 AD. This eruption was 10 times more powerful than the famous Krakatoa eruption of 1883, says Dr. Stothers. They heard its sound from 3,000 kilometers away. The power of this eruption was VEI, volcanic explosivity index level, 6 to 7. This meant it was thousands of times more powerful than nuclear bombs. Following the eruption, millions of tons of ash and gas were scattered into the atmosphere. These materials spread around the world with winds. Second theory, the Ilopango eruption. New research conducted in 2019 points to a different volcano, Ilopango in El Salvador. Dr. Robert Dull from Oxford University explains, the Ilopango eruption was much closer. The timing also matches perfectly. Ilopango's eruption completely changed Central America. Maya civilization went into serious crisis because of this eruption, and the ash clouds created by the eruption reached Europe via jet streams. Some scientists think that multiple volcanoes erupted in 536 AD. Maybe Krakatoa, Ilopango, and other volcanoes became active during the same period, says Dr. McCormick. This could explain the global effect. Whichever volcano erupted, the result was the same: worldwide climate catastrophe, asterisk. The similarities between the Ragnarök narrative in Viking mythology and the 536 AD catastrophe are astonishing. Mythology says, Surtur's fire sword burns the world. Reality, volcanic eruption produces massive fire and flames. Mythology says, Fimbul winter, a winter lasting 3 years. Reality, volcanic winter lasts 14 years between 536 to 550. Mythology says, the sun and moon disappear. Reality, volcanic ash blocks the sun. 18 months of darkness occurs. Mythology says, Midgard is covered with great waters. Reality, climate change melts glaciers, sea level rises. Mythology says, gods and monsters fight. Reality, humans struggle for survival. These parallels are too detailed to be coincidental. Dr. B.O. Gregslund from Uppsala University says, Ragnarök myths are real catastrophe engraved into collective memory. Viking oral traditions were very strong. Stories passed down through generations were mythological interpretations of real events. And the 536 AD catastrophe was so traumatic that it shaped an entire culture's worldview. Now Viking sagas constantly dealt with end times themes, depicting the people expecting the end of the world. This wasn't just imagination. This was mythological expression of lived trauma. And most interestingly, the Ragnarök story doesn't just have destruction. The story ends with rebirth. Some gods and humans survive. A new world is born. This also fits the real catastrophe experience. People had recovered after the catastrophe and built new lives. The 536 AD catastrophe didn't only affect Scandinavia. There are records from all over the world, and they all describe the same catastrophe. In Chinese records, the Wei Shu Chronicle, the dragon devoured the sun. There was darkness all year long. People died. In Maya records, Karakul inscriptions, the gods became angry, the sun went out, great famine came. In Byzantine records, Procopius, the sun appeared without giving light. Human faces were always in shadow. In Irish records, Annals of Ulster, the sun's failure, loss of crops, famine. In Korean records, Samguk Sagi, day became dark, stars became invisible. All these records describe the same period, the same phenomena. Modern climatology confirms these records. Global climate data shows that worldwide cooling really occurred in 536. This global catastrophe was interpreted differently by different cultures. The Chinese explained it with dragon legends. Maya saw it as the god's anger. For Vikings, it became Ragnarök. But the same truth lay beneath all of them: volcanic eruption. This situation shows how fragile human history is. A single natural event can affect all world civilizations, and each culture explains it according to their own worldview. The Vikings' Ragnarök myth was born this way. a real catastrophe transformed into a mythological narrative. How does modern science prove the 536 AD catastrophe? The strongest evidence comes from ice cores. In analyses conducted in 2019, intense sulfur dioxide was found in ice layers from 536 AD. Dr. Michael Sigel from the University of Bern. These sulfur levels are evidence of major volcanic eruption. The timing matches perfectly. Antarctic ice cores also show volcanic traces from the same period. The same signal from both poles means global volcanic activity, says Dr. Abbott. This evidence is very strong because ice cores don't lie. Each year's ice layer preserves that year's atmospheric chemistry, and the volcanic eruption signature in the layer from 536 AD is very clear. Tree rings tell the same story. Tree rings from ancient trees in Finland, Sweden, Russia show abnormal narrowing in 536 to 550 years. Trees don't lie, says dendrochronologist Dr. Ulf Bunken. These rings are definitive proof of cold climate. Trees grow less in cold years, rings become thinner. And exactly after 536, this thinning is seen throughout Northern Europe. Archaeological findings also support this. Evidence of famine and abandonment is found in 6th century settlements across Europe. In the Tische settlement in Denmark, half-finished belongings and signs of hasty abandonment from this period are found. Volcanic ash particles were found in sedimentary layers from this period in Swedish lakes. All this scientific data shows the same result. A global volcanic catastrophe occurred in 536 AD. As technology advanced in the 21st century, we're learning more about 536 AD. Thanks to NASA's satellite data and supercomputer models, we understand much more clearly what happened in that period. Dr. Gavin Schmidt from NASA GIS. If a 536 type eruption happened today, global temperature would drop 2 to 3 degrees, agriculture would collapse. The Max Planck Institute in Germany recreated the 536 AD catastrophe on computer. The model shows that volcanic ash stayed in the atmosphere for 2 years, says Dr. Johan Junkloss. These models show how big the eruption was and why the effects lasted so long. In new excavations in Indonesia, massive volcanic layers from the 6th century were found. Dr. Shanaka De Silva. These layers show the local effects of the 536 eruption. It was much bigger. Also, genetic research gives very interesting results. Traces of demographic bottleneck in the 6th century are found in European people's DNA. Human population seriously decreased during this period, says geneticist Dr. Johannes Krause. It's evidence that a great crisis occurred. All these modern studies show that the 536 AD catastrophe was much bigger than Viking sources described. And the Ragnarök legend was only a small echo of this great catastrophe. The 536 AD catastrophe didn't only affect Vikings, but all world civilizations. In the Eastern Roman Empire, Emperor Justinian's conquests stopped because of this. The army weakened due to famine. Historian Procopius. The emperor had to postpone his grand plans. The people went hungry. Justinian's great dreams, reuniting the Roman Empire, fell through because of this volcanic catastrophe. The situation was even more dramatic in Maya civilization. Maya cities in Central America began to be abandoned during this period. Archaeologist Dr. David Hoddle. Maya calendars call this period dark time. The Ilopango eruption had directly hit Maya lands. Collapsing agriculture. In China, the Northern Wei dynasty faced serious rebellions during this period. People rebelled from hunger. The dynasty almost collapsed, says sinologist Dr. Mark Lewis. The Sassanid Empire in Iran also weakened during this period. When volcanic winter collapsed agriculture, the economy stopped, says Iranist Dr. Turay Garayi. This global effect shows that 536 AD was not just local, but truly a planetary catastrophe. Each civilization had its own interpretation, but the underlying reality was the same. And this catastrophe brought the end of some civilizations while completely changing others. The Vikings' Ragnarök legend was also part of this global transformation. The 536 AD catastrophe left lasting marks on Viking culture, and these marks can still be seen today. The strengthening of Ragnarök belief occurred after this catastrophe. Before this catastrophe, Ragnarök was just a vague legend. After the catastrophe, it became a central belief. Apocalyptic themes increased in Viking art after 536, says art historian Dr. Lena Holmquist. Temple changes were also interesting. End times symbols multiplied in Scandinavian temples after this period. Burial customs changed. Objects with rebirth themes show increase in Viking graves after the 6th century. The generation that experienced the catastrophe passed the story to the next generations, says folklorist Dr. Terry Gunnell. The 536 catastrophe was also the end of the Germanic migration period. Peoples began to transition to settled life. Tribes that were constantly migrating began to establish permanent settlements after the catastrophe. This was a major social change. Also, Viking religious beliefs changed. Belief in old gods began to be questioned. The question, why couldn't the gods protect us, shook pagan faith. This also prepared the ground for the spread of Christianity in subsequent centuries. The Ragnarök myth was in a sense the way this social trauma was processed. People had put the catastrophe they experienced into a mythological framework to make sense of it. Could a similar volcanic catastrophe occur today? This question worries scientists greatly. Supervolcanoes like Yellowstone, Toba, Campi Flegrei are still active. Volcanologist Dr. Michael Rampino, if one of these erupts, it would be a bigger catastrophe than 536 AD. Because today's world population is much larger and the agricultural system is much more fragile, climate change increases the risk even more. Climate is already unstable. Volcanic eruption could create much greater chaos, says climatology expert Dr. Alan Robach. Today's agriculture is much more dependent and centralized. Volcanic winter could collapse modern agriculture and affect billions of people. Some scientists describe today's catastrophe scenarios as modern Ragnarök. Dr. Nick Bostrom, volcanic eruption, asteroid impact, supervolcano. These are modern Ragnarök, but there's also a hopeful side. Thanks to modern technology, we can predict these catastrophes in advance and prepare. In Viking times, people didn't understand what was happening. Today we know what volcanic eruption and climate change are. This knowledge can protect us. Also, there's global communication and cooperation. But still, 536 AD shows us that nature is very powerful. A single volcanic eruption can change the entire world. And perhaps the Ragnarök legend reminds us, human civilization is fragile. Archaeological discoveries made about 536 AD in recent years further clarify the story. The 6th century settlement found in the Helge Island, excavations in Sweden in 2018 paints a dramatic picture. The evidence found here is surprising. Half-finished food remains, hastily abandoned household items, human skeletons showing signs of starvation. Archaeologist Dr. Lena Holmquist, people seem to have suddenly fled. It's a very dramatic abandonment. These findings confirm the Great Flight described by Viking sources. Hall remains found in Tish excavations in Denmark were also suddenly abandoned in the mid-6th century. Under normal circumstances, such large structures are used for centuries, says Dr. Lars Jørgensen. But here there's sudden abandonment. The 6th century layers found in Avaldsens excavations in Norway have abnormally few agricultural remains. Agricultural production collapsed, says Dr. Dagfinsker. People returned to hunting-gathering. These archaeological findings show that the 536 catastrophe wasn't just legend, but really experienced social collapse. People abandoned their homes, left agriculture, and went into survival mode. And this traumatic experience was passed down through generations, eventually becoming the Ragnarök legend. These discoveries show how modern archaeology can confirm Viking legends. When oral tradition combines with physical evidence, the real story emerges. How does modern science analyze Viking oral traditions, and what conclusions does it reach? Linguistic analysis is very interesting. The word Ragnarök means twilight of the gods, and this word became widespread after the 6th century. Dr. Jesse Biak from UCLA. This word was used very rarely before. Narrative structure analysis is also important. The structure of the Ragnarök story fits post-trauma narrative patterns. This is the way PTSD societies tell stories, says folklore expert Dr. Maria Totter. Geographic references are also correct. Places in Ragnarök stories match real Scandinavian geography. Places like Midgard, Asgard reference real locations. Says Dr. Rudolf Simek, time references are the most interesting part. Thimble winter's 3 years definition matches the typical duration of volcanic winter. 3 years is typical volcanic winter duration, says Dr. McCormick. Also, details in the story are surprisingly accurate. The sun's disappearance, increased cold, agricultural collapse, famine, migration. These are all real effects of the 536 catastrophe. This analysis shows that Viking oral tradition is very reliable. They didn't produce their stories just with imagination. They transmitted real lived events in mythological language. And this tradition is so strong that it still reflects real events 1500 years later. How is the 536 AD catastrophe narrated in other cultures, and what similarities exist between these narratives? In Celtic mythology, Irish legends tell of the Great Darkness and Duvmore. These stories also include themes of the sun's disappearance, long winter, famine. In Slavic mythology, Eastern European, Kashi's curse stories exist. This also deals with the theme of the world being plunged into darkness. In Finno-Ugric mythology, the Kalevala epic has the story of the breaking of Sampo. This also tells of the loss of the source of abundance and the coming of darkness. Common themes are surprising: the sun's disappearance, long winter, famine and catastrophe, disruption of world order, hope for rebirth. Dr. Wendy Doniger from the University of Chicago. These common themes are evidence of common trauma. This similarity isn't coincidence. The same global catastrophe created similar mythological responses in different cultures. Each culture interpreted according to their own worldview, but the basic experience was the same. This situation shows that mythology isn't just imagination, but processing of real lived events. And the 536 AD catastrophe was such a great trauma that it left traces in all world cultures. This cross-cultural similarity supports modern anthropology's theory of common human experience. Humans give similar psychological responses to great catastrophes and create similar mythological narratives. This also shows that Ragnarök is a universal story. How do modern scientific fields interpret Ragnarök, and what do these interpretations tell us? From climatology perspective, according to Dr. Robach, Ragnarök is a perfect climate catastrophe description. Scientific translation is as follows: Thimble winter equals volcanic winter. Surtur's fire equals volcanic eruption. The sun's disappearance equals atmospheric blockage. Great waters equals climate change effects. From geology perspective, according to volcanologist Dr. Sigel, Ragnarök is mythological interpretation of geological catastrophe. From anthropology perspective, according to Dr. Biak, crystallization of post-trauma social memory. From psychology perspective, according to Carl Jung follower Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz, Mythological processing of collective trauma. These interpretations show that Ragnarök is a multi-layered narrative. It's not just a fantastic story, but also historical document, psychological analysis, social anthropology example. Modern science understands this and has new respect for Viking mythology, because this mythology correctly described geological and climatological events that modern science only understood in the last 50 years. 1,500 years ago. This also shows that ancient people were much more observant and analytical than we thought. They carefully observed the catastrophes they experienced, recorded them correctly, just expressed them in mythological rather than scientific language. The 536 AD catastrophe continued to create deep effects not only in that period, but in subsequent centuries. Demographic change was dramatic. European population decreased by 25 to 50% in the 6th century. Genetic studies show this demographic bottleneck lasted 200 years. This population loss changed all European history. Cultural change was also great. Paganism weakened, Christianity strengthened. People sought new belief systems after the catastrophe, says religious historian Dr. Peter Brown. The old gods couldn't protect people, maybe the new religion could. Technological change was also important. Iron production decreased. Technology regressed. The beginning of the Dark Ages is partly related to this catastrophe, says technology historian Dr. Lynn White. Political change was also permanent, great. Empires weakened, small kingdoms emerged. When central powers collapsed, local leaders came forward. Economic change was also a turning point. Trade decreased. Agricultural pastoral economy began. Cities shrank, villages gained importance. All these changes shaped medieval Europe. And Viking culture's Ragnarök obsession was also part of this great transformation. They were telling not just their own trauma, but the transformation all of Europe experienced. That's why Ragnarök isn't just a Scandinavian legend, but mythological narrative of an important turning point in European history. What would the consequences be if a similar catastrophe occurred today? Modern science is trying to answer this question, and the results are frightening. Yellowstone scenario. If the Yellowstone supervolcano erupts, North American agriculture collapses. Global temperature drops 3 to 5 degrees. 2 to 3 years of volcanic winter occurs. Billions of people are affected. Toba scenario. The Toba supervolcano in Indonesia erupted 74,000 years ago and reduced human population to 10,000. If it erupts again, it could create similar effect. Campi Flegrei scenario. This supervolcano in Italy would directly hit Europe, end Mediterranean agriculture, change global climate. According to Dr. Bostrom, volcanic eruption is an X-risk category. It can threaten humanity. Scientists are working on modern Ragnarök preparation. Volcano monitoring systems are being established. Early warning systems are being developed. Catastrophe scenarios are being simulated. But we're still in a much more fragile situation than 536 AD, because world population is very large. Agricultural system is centralized and dependent on technology. Global trade is complex. A volcanic winter could hit the modern world much harder. And perhaps the Ragnarök legend teaches us a lesson. We should never underestimate nature's power. Viking ancestors learned this and transmitted it to us through legends. Modern technology is powerful, but nature is more powerful. What are the contributions of Ragnarök mythology to modern science, and how does this legend help scientists today? In climate science, Viking sources provide valuable data for paleoclimatology. Climate descriptions in ancient sources help scientific research, says Dr. Buntken. Weather details in Ragnarök narratives help understand 6th century climate. In volcanology, Ragnarök narratives contribute to volcanic activity research. Mythological descriptions help understand real volcanic processes. In anthropology, it provides examples for post-trauma social behavior studies. In psychology, it provides material for collective memory and mythology formation research. In risk assessment, it provides historical examples for modern catastrophe scenarios. The 536 AD catastrophe is a reference point for modern risk assessment. Says Dr. McCormick, the Ragnarök legend is also important for science communication. Mythological narratives can be used to explain complex scientific topics to the public. People may struggle to understand scientific data, but easily grasp story-form narratives. That's why modern scientists use legends like Ragnarök as educational tools. And most importantly, this legend shows that ancient people could make much more scientific observations than we thought. How does modern popular culture reflect Ragnarök, and how much does it overlap with scientific facts? In Marvel movies, Ragnarök and Thor films is presented as a Hollywood interpretation. Far from scientific reality, but mythological themes are. Correct, says mythology expert Dr. Simic. In video games, Ragnarök is featured in games like God of War, Assassin's Creed, and these games sometimes include scientific findings. In literature, Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology book uses scientific data and blends mythological narrative with modern knowledge. In documentaries, scientific Ragnarök documentaries are broadcast on channels like History Channel, BBC. These media products bring the public closer to scientific facts, but can sometimes spread misinformation. What's important is that popular culture interacts with scientific discoveries. Marvel's Thor is completely fantastic, but still encouraged people to be interested in real Viking mythology. And that interest increases curiosity about scientific research. Thanks to this cycle, more people learn about real historical events, like the 536 AD catastrophe. Popular culture serves as a bridge between entertainment and education, fantasy and science. Was Ragnarök real? The answer to this question has now become clear. Yes, but not in the way expected. Ragnarök isn't a story of God's war, giant monsters, magical weapons, but it's mythological narrative of a real global catastrophe. The volcanic eruption in 536 AD and the climate crisis it created affected Viking culture so deeply that it became legend, and this legend teaches us many things. First, ancient people's observation power was much better than we thought. Second, natural disasters can fundamentally change human civilization. Third, mythologies aren't just imagination, but processing of real lived events. We should remember these lessons in the modern world. Today, there are also supervolcanoes, climate change risk, global catastrophe threat, and perhaps in the future, people will create their own mythologies when telling about our period. They'll say, once upon a time, people polluted their own planet, changed the climate, then great catastrophe came. Ragnarök shows us that human civilization is fragile, but also resilient. The catastrophe that destroyed the Vikings also inspired them to create stronger legends. Perhaps the real message is this: disasters are inevitable, but the stories that emerge from them can make us wiser. Ragnarök isn't just an end, but also a new beginning. Just like in the Viking legend,